All right, welcome back. In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can use the AWS command line interface on your Synology through a Docker container. Now, fortunately, the Docker container is an official release from Amazon, which makes all of this pretty easy. So if you find that you want to call AWS services from your Synology, for example, if you wanted to send some files to S3, maybe do some backups like we were doing in a different video, the Docker container makes this super easy since you don't have to install a whole bunch of stuff onto your Synology and you can keep the installation relatively clean. So the Docker container option may be a direction that you want to go. So let's take a look at how to do that. So the first thing you need to do, and we have the DSM in front of us, but before you log into the DSM, you're going to need to make sure you have an AWS account and you have your access keys set up in that account. Now, we did look at this in a separate video as part of our kind of backup process, but it's pretty easy to go set that up on your own. And you're also going to need to make sure that you have the container manager package installed on your Synology. So assuming you have all of that, you can go ahead and log into your DSM like we have here and open up the container manager. And you can see here, I have no containers, nothing installed at this point. So the first thing we're going to want to do is download the Amazon AWS CLI Docker image. And so I'm going to show you over here on the Docker website, you can see the official release for the command line interfaces for AWS, and that's what we're going to be using. So what we do is in the container manager, we're going to go into the registry, and what we need to do is search for this. And here it is, second one. So we're just going to click that. And this is going to download the Docker image for this container. And we will choose the latest tag, which is fine. All right, so now that we have the image installed, now we can create a container out of it. And we'll just use the default container name. We can leave all these defaults here. Do not enable auto restart. And the reason is this container actually doesn't run anything. And I'll talk about that in a minute. We don't need to open any ports. I'm not going to worry about the volume settings right now. You can pretty much just leave this as it is. So by the way, interestingly enough, what you'll find is you can't actually run this container. So if you run it, actually, if you auto start it, you'll get an error that it exited immediately. And the reason is this container is set up to basically run a command line tool. So there's no ongoing process in the container. And you can see it expressed right here with the entry point. So what this means is when the container starts, it's going to execute the AWS command. And the AWS command will pretty much just print help and exit, and it'll close the container. And so we'll see more of that in a minute. And I'm just going to say, you don't even need to click run after it started. So let it do its thing. So now we have the container. The next thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to enable SSH into your Synology, because that is how we're going to interact with this. And so open up the control panel, choose terminal and SNMP, and enable the SSH service. And click apply. All right, so we have SSH running. We have the AWS CLI Docker container installed. So the next thing we're going to do is SSH into the host. So after you've logged into your host, we can just confirm that Docker exists. All right. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to run a simple command just to confirm that the AWS command works within the Docker container. And what we'll do is we'll just run the version command on it. So it looks something like this. And you can see that worked, and it looks like we have a working container. And remember I commented that the entry point for the container is the AWS command. That's basically what's happening here. All of this, think of all of this as basically running the AWS command. So we're basically running AWS-S version, and we'll actually create an alias at the end of this that makes this super simple. Now, the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to set up some local directories that we then will pass into the container that will store credentials and access keys that make it easier to use this in the future. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a directory here locally, and then we will expose that to the container. So we will make a So now that we have that directory, we're going to run a command that configures the AWS CLI. And this is that command. And so we're going to run sudo docker run. And what we're doing is we're basically exposing our local.aws directory. And right here, we're taking .aws from our home directory, and we're exposing it into the container under /root.aws. And so inside the container, it will be able to see our directory. And this is, again, the container name. And we're going to run the configure command. And this is just going to set up credentials inside. And so this is where you're going to need to pull out your AWS access key and secret key and enter those. So we'll do that. And if you have a default region that you want to work with, you can enter it here. Then you won't need to put it on the command line options. So I will just enter US East 2 since I've been playing with that. And I'll leave the output format as none. So now we have run the container, we have configured the command line, and what's happened is the container has saved these credentials into the .aws directory. And you can see that right there. You could have also created those yourself, but the tool will help do it for you. So now you should be good to go, and you should be able to use this to run whatever AWS commands you want, but let's just run an example. So let's just do this and do an ls of our S3 buckets. So we're gonna run an S3 ls. There you go, we have one bucket. It's where we were doing some test backups to, and that works fine. So let me show you one other thing to make this simple. You can actually create an alias, and of course, save it to your .bashrc or zshrc, whatever works for you. So now we've created an alias where we're aliasing the AWS command to this entire Docker command, and that just makes it look like we had natively installed the AWS CLI. So again, we should be able to run AWS S3 ls, and that worked fine. And of course, we can even look at the contents of the bucket. And we'll recursively look at everything in it. There you go, the contents of a bucket that actually has backup from Hyper Backup in there that we were able to recursively look at using the command line, the AWS command line tools through a Docker container. So that is it, super easy to set up and use, and hope that helps, and we'll see you next time.